Good morning, everybody. Happy Saturday. We have so much to talk about. I couldn't even sleep last night. Major case of insomnia because as those models were coming in last night, the monster trough ejection that we covered even a couple days ago looks to be even more monster next weekend. And there's even some preceding trough ejections before that. Looks like multiple trough ejections, one after another, over the next week. And there's even a marginal risk in effect for tomorrow night from East Texas through a large swath of Arkansas up through the Missouri boot heel, even into western Kentucky. 2% tornado threat associated with that. That's going to be mainly a nocturnal event. I'm not as high on tomorrow night's event as I am on the late next week through next weekend trough ejection, and that's the one that you see pictured here. Definitely monitoring the Mid-South for big-time severe weather potential, especially the late next week system through the weekend, but there is a chance still tomorrow night of some pretty substantial severe weather, but more of a nocturnal type of an event. I also want to cover the blizzard warning, those that you see in red there for the Big Island of Hawaii. Those are up on the higher peaks of those two volcanoes up there during the Big Island. You may remember when we covered Tropical Cyclone Lane out there, that massive flash flood that was coming down Rainbow Falls there in the Big Island. Absolute mass chaos. You could smell the flood, had a sweet smell to it. But this isn't all that unusual as you might think. The last blizzard warning was during spring of 2018, but they do get a lot of snow on the top of those volcanoes on the Big Island. They're up above about 14,000 feet up there, so up above 13,000 at least, both of those. And so they do extend well up into the troposphere. So those wind gusts of over 100 miles an hour are certainly possible there as well. I'm going to break down that system. Definitely a bowling ball of an upper level storm system that's sagging south over Hawaii. That's why you have a lot of those flash flood watches, blizzard warnings as well through the weekend. Up to a foot possible, winds over 100 miles an hour there, the higher terrain. I'm sure Rainbow Falls is going to be ripping as well, similar to what it did during Hurricane Lane back in the day as well. But this is the focus for me, at least over the next week, is going to be the increased likelihood in big time severe weather moving ahead. And I want to show you a couple of these loops, the 6Z GFS, which is consistent, of course, with the 0Z GFS and the European model that has hopped on board this as well with the storm system. Big time, massive trough ejection. There you can see that trough ejection there. That's the one on the 11th and 12th as indicated by the European model. You can also see the 6Z GFS in the bottom right of that image, but watch that dive out of the Pacific Northwest here. And the European model wasn't very high on this setup before. There's the initial system late next week, and then look at that system barreling south in the Pacific Northwest. High amplitude trough, still digging south, barreling south of the latitude of the Four Corners, and then ejecting across the southern plains. And look at that, maintain its amplitude. That trough maintains its amplitude all the way off the East Coast. So I do think that there is a chance for severe weather over the southeastern U.S. as well with next weekend's trough ejection. This is the European model that you're seeing right here. And now I want to show you the GFS, which has been on this thing since day one. I think the GFS now is a superior model to the European. Seems like some of those upgrades by the U.S. here with the GFS model have definitely worked wonders and definitely helped it to catch up, if not even surpass, the European model. And there you can see the end of next week's system lifting off the mid-Atlantic, and then it opens the floodgates for the next one coming in from the Pacific Northwest. Look at that high amplitude trough diving south across the Four Corners, across the southern plains, exciting the development of an intense surface cyclone. A mid-latitude cyclone is going to eject off to the northeast toward the Midwest, portions of the Great Lakes as well, bringing with it some big-time snow, I expect. Locations like Chicago, up toward Milwaukee, Grand Rapids. Still the exact track of that swath. Huge uncertainty with that since we're still a week out, but somebody on the northwest side of that system definitely going to get hammered, I believe, by some big-time snow. Let me make sure my audio is still going strong here. Turn it up a little bit. And of course, out ahead of any big time trough like that, you can see those dips in the trough. You're also going to get the exciting of a energized low-level jet out ahead of that trough. That's because you have low pressure to the west as that trough ejects, higher pressure off to the east. That in between that squeeze play, you get the southerly low-level jet, strong channel of wind just above the ground out of the due south. Look at that one develop there over the Great Plains and then expand over the mid-south. That's in the developing low-level jet there ahead of late next week's system. And then there is the next system developing low-level jet over the southeastern Great Plains. That starts to invigorate as well as you get a little closer to the 11th, 12th. There it is, large-scale low-level jet exploding across the central U.S., and that's ahead of that monster trough ejection that is now forecast by a majority of models, a majority of ensemble members as well. Pretty striking agreement amongst the individual models on next weekend's trough ejection. And that's going to likely excite a large-scale low-level jet that could cover the whole entire U.S. There's still a lot of uncertainty exactly where that shear is going to set up. There's a little bit of a veered low-level jet there late next week, Wednesday into Thursday. That also could bring some severe weather to the Mid-South. You definitely don't want to overlook these systems that are happening in the near term because there's a system that looks more favorable in the long range. But you look at this loop of moisture here as well, the dew point, and you can see that that low-level jet pumps that moisture northward out of an untainted Gulf of Mexico. And that southerly low-level jet is not only crucial for generating strong low-level shear, but also for pumping that moisture northward out of the Gulf of Mexico in the warm sectors of these systems. And there you can see that moisture lifting northward out ahead of a very large warm sector, out ahead of a large trough within a large warm sector over the central U.S. That moisture that pumps northward out of the Gulf of Mexico is also going to feed the snowstorm on the backside of the system. That looks like it's going to eject from the Midwest up toward the Great Lakes. That moisture that pumps northward out of the Gulf of Mexico wraps around the system, squeezed out and stretched in the deformation zone on the northwest side of that surface low. And that's usually where those more substantial severe weather events will happen. But the low-level jet, crucial to pumping that moisture northward. Also crucial for other things as well, such as the generation of that low-level shear. And I also want to show you the near-term models as well. We want to break down the threat of severe weather coming up with that marginal risk in East Texas across Arkansas Sunday night. But first, I want to show you this system that is generating the blizzard warnings in Hawaii. Here you can see a bowling ball of an upper-level storm system, a very buckled jet, and this system actually closes off just to the west of Hawaii. That brings a very moist, strong flow to the higher terrain of that big island. Also a lot of cold air aloft with this system. And we can loop forward a bit and notice how that bowling ball just sits to the west of the big island of Hawaii. Nice moisture feed with a subtropical connection, hammering the entire island chain, and that's why there are flash flood watches that cover the entire island chain there, including the big island. And then you've got those blizzard warnings at the higher terrain. This is on Monday morning, so the blizzard is going to start to subside by this time. It's going to peak right now through about Sunday, and then you start to see a relaxation of those isobars there to the east of that upper level low. Should get a relaxation of those very strong winds even across the higher terrain up there across Hawaii, the big island of Hawaii. So this is Saturday, and look at those strong westerlies as this bowling ball of a buckled upper level system is slowly drifting off to the south toward the Hawaii big island. Very tight isobars as well here. Wind very strong, the jet stream very strong as well. The higher terrain winds should gust over 100 miles an hour there on the tops of those volcanoes in the big island of Hawaii. Strong southwesterlies there. Looks like there could even be some stronger winds the western part of the island chain, except that there's not as much in the way of that extreme high elevation that you have in the big island with those volcanoes penetrating up above 13,000 feet. But there you can see the source of the blizzard warnings in Hawaii there. Not as rare as you might think. They get quite a bit of snow up on the tops of those volcanoes. They're up above 13,000 feet. The key to get enough cold air in the subtropics is to go up in elevation. And those volcanoes, if you count from the seafloor all the way up, I believe they're taller than Mount Everest, like greater than 28,000 feet up there. So a lot. Those are massive mountains. And then above the ocean, those peaks go up about 13,000 feet above sea level. So penetrating way up high into the troposphere, and that's why you're getting those blizzard warnings up there. So now let's break down the 2% area, the marginal risk across East Texas, across a large swath of Arkansas as well. Here is that 2% area, includes southeastern Oklahoma, the jungles there of southeastern Oklahoma, the Ozarks as well, up through the Missouri Boot Heel, even into western Kentucky, even southwestern Indiana up there, down near Evansville, Henryville. You could be included in that 2% risk. And again, it is largely a nocturnal threat tomorrow night, I believe. I'm not as high on this event as I am on the late next week and next weekend events, but there is still a chance of a tornado threat. And let's break down some of these short fuse models over the southeastern Great Plains as the 12Z GFS is coming out. So I'm hoping that by the end of this briefing, we'll be able to break down some of the new models that are coming. This is the wonderful pivotalweather.com website where you can generate these awesome GIFs and animations. Great for a visualizer here for this model data. It's also done by my friends, former storm chasing friends of mine. We used to do the Stream Thunder back in the day. They were great storm chasers, live streaming through the TVN platform. Good friends of mine as well, but they've grown up. Don't storm chase as much anymore. Doing big things here at pivotalweather.com, and I'm honored to be able to use these graphics. There's that front that goes through. So this is on Sunday evening. You can see temperatures warming up to close to 70 here across southeastern Texas. Let's take a look at the moisture and the dew points. Upper 60s, even a reservoir of 70 plus dew points just sitting down there in deep South Texas. Low-level jet's going to be a little bit late to develop, but it is a little veered and just starting to ramp up here at 0Z. This is just after sunset. So again, this is a late night event. I do think it's going to be a nocturnal type of a severe weather event, but anywhere within this axis, this low-level jet axis after sunset, down from deep South Texas, East Texas, all the way up through a large swath of Arkansas, up through the Ozarks later on, and even beyond that into western Kentucky, southwestern Indiana could have some potential. But let's watch this low-level jet evolve and ramp up as we get a little bit closer to the late evening hours, 10, 11 o'clock. You can see it increasing to near 50 knots. Quite a bit of directional shear as well. Southwest to northeast, low-level jet, and that is over top a decoupled boundary layer, so you're likely going to have more south-southeasterly surface winds out here, and that includes all the way up into the Ozarks. You have those southerlies as that moisture surge reaches northern Arkansas with that southwesterly low-level jet. There's a decent chance that the Ozarks are going to remain a little bit too dry for that big severe weather, but that 50-knot low-level jet transports those low to mid-60s all the way up into western Kentucky. And low-level jet ramping up additionally. Let's take a look and see what the surface-based CAPE looks like out here, the thermodynamics. This is going to be the potentially limiting factor, and it's going to be happening overnight tonight, but still, nice surface-based instability dominating out here across central southern Texas, and that stripe of instability through northeastern Texas, southeastern Oklahoma, southwestern Arkansas up there into central Arkansas, and then a little tongue of surface-based instability all the way up into southern Indiana, western Kentucky there by late evening. So we'll have to keep an eye on that as well. But that CAPE just sits there and bubbles, and you're going to have these feeder bands, convection that comes in. You're also going to have convection expanding to the northeast within that moisture regime. Looking at the low-level shear, definitely stronger low-level shear. Northeastern Texas up into central southern Arkansas, where you get that 50-knot low-level jet up there. This is at 6Z, so we're going to be getting closer to the middle of the night here. But that is a very favorable hodograph. Looks like some decent surface-based instability to be able to punch through that. Nice dry reservoir of air in the mid to upper portion of the troposphere as well. Let me remove my head so I can show you that nicely curved hodograph, and there you can see it. A pretty veered low-level jet, but some decent directional shear with relatively weak surface winds, almost due southerly surface winds, a little bit weaker than 10 knots, and then you get that due southwesterly low-level jet in excess of 50 knots. That directional shear is key to carving out that hodograph there. You can see that hodograph curve, nice long looped hodograph. Your upper level winds more than adequate to evacuate that rain and hail from the rotating updraft as well. You can see the area here enclosed within the storm motion vector and that hodograph curve, quite substantial. In excess of 300 0 to 1 kilometer shear, and that's pretty uniform. That hodograph shape, quite uniform all the way down into northeastern Texas as well, down near the Paris, Texas area. That's a big hodograph. Not as much in the way of surface-based instability there, though. Quite a capping inversion as you go a little bit off to the southwest. And that's going to be a limiting factor, is the thermodynamics with this event. But any surface-based storm, any storm that can develop a deep mesocyclone that's even a little bit elevated, should be able to drill through that layer. And the 3 kilometer NAM is not showing much in the way of convection here across central, eastern, southern Texas. It is showing some bubblers though along the northern edge of that moisture axis, and any of these that are able to become surface based late night tomorrow night, those will have potential to maybe put down a couple of tornado warnings. But even by 4Z, starting to show some bubblers here in central Arkansas tomorrow night, and then late that convection begins to develop. Central southern Arkansas along that boundary. It's a bit of a front up there, kind of the northern edge of that moisture as well. There is the front starting to sag south. So once this front meets up with that moisture, it's likely going to unzip. You're going to see a little bit more convection. It's going to be a little elevated. I'm wondering, though, if you can get a prefrontal trough out here, central northeastern Arkansas. That's your chance of surface-based storms, and that's all nested within that 50-knot southwesterly low-level jet into central Arkansas. Look at that, 50 knots, west-southwesterly even. So there is quite a bit of directional shear with those weaker south-southwesterly or due southerly type winds, central southern Arkansas back into northeastern Texas. Your low-level jet weakens with time across central and southern Texas. There could be some feeder bands of convection feeding into coastal Texas, even coastal Louisiana. But really, this front and the prefrontal trough along this front, along the western gradient of that low-level jet, that's where I'd be watching for the potential of that convection tomorrow night. Those are some of those bubblers there. And look at that convection all the way up into western Kentucky, southern Illinois as well. Any surface-based storm that's able to develop within that environment will have the chance of producing a tornado anywhere along that swath as well. So let's take a look at the HRRR, see what that shows for tomorrow night, tomorrow late evening. Let me take my mug out of here. This is at 2Z, so this is at 8 p.m. Central Standard Time, well after sunset out there. And you're starting to get some of those bubblers out into Arkansas with that increasing low-level jet. But I'm not seeing much in the way of a potential for surface-based storms until that cold front begins to arrive. You have the development here of a prefrontal trough as well. Looks like the Ozarks try to convect a bit. Looking at the moisture, the HRRR actually is more aggressive with a northward extent of that moisture, whereas the 3 kilometer NAM keeps that moisture off to the southeast of that prefrontal trough. It looks like some of that moisture, though, does make it up into the Ozarks here, according to the HRRR. Interesting. Usually the HRRR has mixing issues, but when you're talking about nocturnal severe weather events and a decoupled boundary layer like this, then I think that the HRRR does a pretty good job with that moisture, and it shows that moisture reaching up into the Ozarks. By about 10-11 p.m., you start to get the initiation of surface-based storms across the Ozarks there of northern Arkansas. Some bubblers all the way up into southern Illinois, western Kentucky as well. This area down toward Poplar Bluff. About 10-11 p.m. midnight, could get some tornado warnings as well. This is all going to be after dark. But definitely the HRRR hinting at those supercell storms across the Ozarks there, northwestern Arkansas. We break down a little forecast sounding very favorable, and very favorable thermodynamics too, with that 64 over 62. A little bit of a nocturnal inversion. But any deep mesocyclone will have no problem drilling through that shallow stable layer at the surface. And you have this nice elevated mixed layer in the mid-levels. A lot of directional shear, too, going from south-southwesterly surface wind to almost a due westerly middle troposphere. And in between, you've got that southwesterly low-level jet there, 50 plus knots, and that creates a very favorable hodograph, storm relative helicity, and it's excess of 250, 0 to 1 kilometer meter squared per second squared, and that creates a very strongly looped hodograph, a lot of storm relative shear contained within that hodograph curve as well, and that's favorable for tornadoes. The kinematics are very favorable for tornadoes. And it does look like, I wouldn't be surprised if we do see a 5% added for this area here of northern Arkansas, even into the southeastern portion of Missouri. Probably we'll have a little noodle of 2% extending into western Kentucky as well. And then the front convects. As that front meets up with that moisture, you're going to have a squall line that's going to develop after midnight. And still could get some embedded tornadic circulations in there within northern Arkansas, but eventually that convective line sags down toward Little Rock by Monday morning. And it eventually back builds down into the Dallas area, maybe some elevated convection down into there by Monday morning. Not expecting much in the way of tornado potential in Dallas. It is possible. But right now, the models are showing the greatest likelihood for tornado potential and for surface-based storms tomorrow night to be across northern Arkansas. Right up in there, North I-40, right into the Ozarks. Nocturnal event in the jungle. Let it rip up there if you can chase. Oh no. So that's the event tomorrow night. I may chase this, but I'm really looking at the end of next week and the weekend for a more widespread outbreak of severe weather. I would love to spend the night, in the middle of the dark there in the jungle. Difficult place to chase. So if it does come together, I may just roll in there, rent a car, blast north, blow my windows out there in the Ozarks of northern Arkansas. Could be a tornado threat there. The short-range models do not convect Texas. So even though Texas is included in that 2% risk, it just simply doesn't get convected. But you got that 62, 63 dew point feeding up into the southern edge of the Ozarks there. The HRRR is more aggressive with the northward extent of that moisture. This is the 3-kilometer NAM showing the Ozarks remaining a bit more dry. I tend to believe the HRRR nocturnal moisture return because you don't have the issues with over mixing that you get during the middle of the day into the afternoon. When you get the mixing out of those dew points, bringing down that dry air from just above the surface down to the surface can weaken, can reduce those dew points, cause a drier atmosphere, and certainly can reduce the tornado potential. But you got this front coming down. You got a prefrontal trough out ahead of it. You got some southerly to south-southwesterly, weaker surface winds. And over top that, you got a 50-knot west-southwesterly low-level jet. Let's see how the HRRR shows the positioning of that low-level jet. Wow. So the HRRR even has a stronger low-level jet out ahead of that front that'll be sagging south into the Ozarks, southeastern Oklahoma tomorrow night. And that's why we do have that slight risk out there for the Ozarks. So now let's get to the mega trough ejection. That's going to be next weekend. And I'm not going to cover this one in as much detail. We do have the 12Z models that are coming out. This is Wednesday, so it does look a lot more progressive with the middle of the week system next week. Probably all signs are going to be pointing toward that trough end of next week, but you do have decent moisture, a veered low-level jet here across the southern U.S. during the middle portion of next week as well. We'll have to keep an eye on that. You do have a nice belt here of strong tropospheric flow as well. A little bit of cyclonic curvature to this flow. So a pretty large warm sector, it looks like, the middle portion of next week. And it's a more progressive of a trough ejection. Leaves this bowling ball that we were talking about behind in northern Mexico. Remember before this was a deeper system and it actually ejected that bowling ball of a system out ahead of the trough. So this is the preceding system. It's off the mid-Atlantic by Wednesday night. But not a deep cold front or an Arctic blast that's going to carve out the Gulf of Mexico. That reservoir of moisture just going to sit down there in the Gulf of Mexico. Look at those 70s dew points sitting down there in the Gulf of Mexico. Let me move my head off to the upper right portion of the screen, and that'll give you a better look at that deep reservoir of moisture down in the Gulf of Mexico. 70s dew points down there. Look at that pool of moisture just waiting for big severe weather to happen. And I think that Wednesday's system could be a big one as well. It's not the sexy big time trough ejection, but it is associated with a lot of directional shear, a veered low level jet, strong westerlies too across the entire multi-state warm sector. We'll just have to see if that trough is going to be deep enough to pull this moisture a little bit more northward up here across Mississippi, Alabama, and Georgia. Right now, though, it does look like a bit more of a sheared out, quickly ejecting, more progressive system. Might even leave some of that moisture behind during the day on Wednesday. Looks like Wednesday next week, though, will be the day to watch here. Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, maybe even up into the Carolinas ahead of this flatter trough. Not as much amplitude as it had a couple days ago when we were watching that, but we can already start to see the signs of that mega trough coming ashore into the Pacific Northwest. There it is. Look at that development of the large-scale western U.S. trough. We were discussing how that cold PDO in the northeastern Pacific, that cold water that's in that horseshoe shape across the northeastern Pacific, should have the tendency for atmospheric rivers across the Pacific Northwest and Western Canada, and the evolution of these large-scale western U.S. troughs. We should just have kind of the tendency for that to happen. It doesn't mean it's going to always be there, but the atmosphere does want it to happen. The sea surface temperatures that are in place across the northeastern Pacific, the intermodulation between the atmosphere and that ocean surface generally should encourage a western U.S. trough. And you can see this big flow here on the backside helping to deepen this trough all the way down to the four corners. Very large scale trough that's always going to be associated with a massive low-level jet downstream. You can see your 850 low developing there. Western Kansas, you're going to have rapid cyclogenesis, lee cyclogenesis we call it, to the lee of the Rockies. 991 low there developing. Southwestern Kansas, and still exactly where that develops is going to be in question, but it's a big trough and a big mid-latitude cyclone that ejects from basically southeastern Colorado, the southern plains, all the way up to the Great Lakes. On the northwest side of such a trough ejection, you're going to probably have a blizzard, probably a big-time snowstorm there. This is on Saturday, so Friday into Saturday now. Big 1045 high building in behind it, mega high as well. But this is that deformation zone to the northwest of that surface low where you'd expect that heavy stripe of snow. And there you can see that deformation zone. Looks like Wisconsin, eastern Iowa in the 6Z model. And it's going to bounce around a lot. The trough's going to change shape. It may not even evolve. Look at the 0Z model last night. Showed a further northwest surface low track. 6Z brings it down a little bit further southeast. Maybe we'll see that in the 12Z as well. It's probably going to bounce around quite a bit back and forth. But that's an area that we're going to need to keep an eye on. Northwestern or Wisconsin, maybe even Chicago, Illinois area there. But then severe weather in this large warm sector. This is going to be during the day on Saturday. Probably stripes of supercells there moving across central southern U.S. But it's so far out, you really should be looking at the ensembles here and assessing certainty. But really, it's just a beautiful mid-latitude trough ejection. Look at all this heavy snow. Western Nebraska, Denver, you'd get a lot of snow from this Colorado low ejecting eastern Colorado toward the Midwest. I know it's been a record-breakingly slow start to the snow season across northeastern Colorado, but I do think that if this trough is anywhere close to being accurate in the long-range models, and there is quite a bit of agreement between the European model and the GFS with this ski jump of a trough ejection, you get those surface pressure falls to the lee of the Rockies with a big trough like this ejects, and just textbook Colorado low, strong mid-latitude trough ejection from the southern Great Plains all the way up to the Great Lakes region. Looks like Wednesday into Thursday, I'm not as high on that event. Looks like a flatter trough, but you still don't want to discount those flatter troughs because a lot of times they're associated with a more veered low-level jet, veered low-level jet, you still get those southerly winds at the surface. You still get directional shear, and so I'll still have to keep an eye on that as well. But this is a massive trough ejection. I'll be streaming live during this, chasing the whole entire time. Looks like a sign of another atmospheric river pumping into the Pacific Northwest as well toward the very end of that forecast period. But that is a beautiful, big-time trough ejection happening right there. So we've got this blizzard in Hawaii. Not as big of a deal as some of the articles are saying. When you view that a little bit out of context, where you have snow at the very highest elevations of a volcano above 13,000 feet in Hawaii, and you have a late start to the snow season in areas like Colorado, you can definitely focus in on that discrepancy a little bit. But the fact is, those really high mountains in Hawaii get snow every single year. They had a blizzard warning back in spring of 2018 as well. I've been up to the top of that observatory, and I'd love to ride out a blizzard up there in that observatory, experience a whiteout for a couple of days up there, but there's just too much severe weather in the forecast next week through next weekend for me to commit to chase an event like that. I'm a tornado chaser first, or hurricanes as well, lake effect and everything, but definitely more of a mid-latitude type of a guy that thrives off of the temperature gradients, just like the jet stream up here in the mid-latitudes. So a very active pattern ahead. I'm going to be breaking it down for you here. And again, in general, here is my cartoon, or this is my target area. In general, you have a massive trough ejection. Pretty strong model agreement on this between the GFS and the European. The biggest trough looks like it's going to be next weekend, but there is a chance of some nocturnal tornadoes in the jungles of the Ozarks back into southeastern Oklahoma, northern Arkansas, maybe as far east as far as southern Illinois and Indiana tomorrow night as well, that we're going to keep a close eye on. So thank you, everybody, for joining me. Have a great Saturday. Monster trough ejection ahead.